Welcome to Despicable Me Deep Dive. Today on the show, 9/11, War on Terror, and Control.
We're diving into some pretty significant questions that have lingered for years.
Yeah, exactly. We're looking at inconsistencies that people have pointed out in the official story of September 11th and, well, everything that followed the War on Terror.
A lot of our listeners have probably heard some of these points before.
For sure. And today we're just going to unpack them a bit, drawing on the analysis in our source material. The idea isn't to, provide definitive answers, but more to highlight where the official narrative seems, well, thin or contested.
Right. Encourage some critical thinking about these really pivotal moments in recent history.
So where should we start? I guess the immediate aftermath, the response.
Well, one of the first things that often comes up is who the hijackers actually were. The source points out that overwhelmingly they're identified as Saudi Arabian nationals.
15 out of 19, right?
That's the commonly cited number. Yet the very first major military response wasn't directed at Saudi Arabia. It was the invasion of Iraq.
Which seems disconnected. If the goal was retaliation for 9/11, why Iraq? Saddam Hussein wasn't linked to al-Qaeda in that way, was he?
Not directly to 9/11, no. And that apparent contradiction is something the source really emphasizes. It asks, how does invading Iraq align with the stated cause of the war on terror, which was initially framed around the 9/11 attacks?
So the source suggests alternative ideas were floated, like maybe it wasn't just about 9/11.
Exactly. Things like controlling oil reserves, broader strategic interests in the Middle East, maybe dealing with perceived threats completely separate from the hijackers' origins.
Right. And this is where, a lot of the conspiracy theories really took root, wasn't it? People questioning their real motives.
That disconnect certainly fueled a lot of skepticism about the official justifications.
Okay, let's pivot to something maybe smaller, but equally strange, the passport.
Ah, yes, the miraculous passport.
Huh. Yeah, that's what it feels like. The story goes, an FBI agent finds one of the hijackers' passports, like lying on the street near Ground Zero, relatively intact shortly after the towers collapsed.
Which, when you think about what happened there, the sheer explosive force, the fire, the pulverization of concrete and steel.
It just seems improbable, doesn't it? How does a paper passport survive that inferno when massive steel beams supposedly failed?
The source highlights this exact point. The official line might be that paper doesn't always burn easily in certain conditions, but
compared to steel melting, it's that contrast, isn't it? Jet fuel melts steel, but paper survives. It strains credibility for a lot of people.
It does. And it contributes to this feeling, mentioned in the source, that maybe the narrative was being shaped or that certain pieces of evidence were presented in a way that felt convenient.
Okay, let's talk about the Pentagon. This is another area where the source material raises a lot of questions.
Right. The core question being, what exactly hit the Pentagon? The official story is American Airlines Flight 77, a Boeing 757.
But people looking at the initial photos, the damage, they ask, where's the plane? Where are the wings, the engines, the tail section? You'd expect a huge debris field from a plane that size.
And the source points to the apparent discrepancy between the size of a 737 and the size of the hole visible in the Pentagon wall, particularly in those early images. It seemed relatively small, almost round.
Yeah, not like the kind of gash you might expect from wings spanning over 120 feet hitting a building. And the lack of visible, large aircraft parts right outside, it's puzzling.
It is. The limited amount of wreckage shown in publicly available photos is a key part of the skepticism.
And then there's the security footage. The Pentagon has got to be one of the most surveilled buildings on Earth, right? Cameras everywhere.
You would certainly think so. Yet the footage released that allegedly shows the impact is incredibly brief. Like, what, 5 frames from one security camera?
5 frames. It barely shows anything definitive. It's a streak, then an explosion. Why wasn't there more? Why not release footage from other cameras that must have had a view?
That lack of clear, comprehensive visual evidence is something the source underscores. It fuels theories that maybe it wasn't a plane, maybe it was a missile, or that something else happened. The lack of transparency just deepens the doubts.
It feels like crucial evidence is missing or being withheld. Okay, moving on. Building 7.
World Trade Center 7. This one is a cornerstone for many skeptics.
Because it wasn't hit by a plane.
Right.
Yet, late in the afternoon on 9/11, it just collapses completely.
Right. It came down rapidly, symmetrically, almost perfectly into its own footprint.
Exactly like a controlled demolition. You see videos of building demolitions, and it looks uncannily similar.
The official explanation is that fires, started by debris from the Twin Towers collapsing nearby, weakened the structure enough to cause a progressive collapse.
But the source points out that many architects and engineers have questioned that. How could fires cause such a sudden, total, symmetrical failure across the entire structure simultaneously? It had never happened to a steel-framed skyscraper before due to fire alone.
And the speed of the collapse, too, near free-fall speed. This fuels the theory, mentioned in the source, that Building 7 was deliberately brought down.
Why, though? Theories range from it being a control center for the Twin Tower demolitions, which is another theory entirely, to destroying sensitive files or evidence housed within the building. SEC offices, Secret Service, CIA.
And then there's that infamous news report.
Oh, yeah, where the BBC reporter is live on air talking about Building 7 having collapsed while it's still clearly visible and standing right behind her in the shot.
That incident is often cited as evidence that maybe the media was working off a pre-written script, that the collapse was known about or planned in advance. It's quite damning visually.
It really makes you wonder what was going on behind the scenes. Okay, what about Flight 93? The one that crashed in Pennsylvania.
Another event shrouded in questions, according to the source. Officially, passengers fought back against the hijackers, leading to the crash. The Let's Roll story.
But again, the crash site itself raises questions. The source mentions the apparent lack of widespread wreckage. For a large plane like a Boeing 757, the debris field seems strangely small and concentrated to some observers.
People expected to see larger pieces, sections of fuselage, wings. But reports and photos showed mostly smaller debris scattered over a wider area, almost like the plane disintegrated.
And the black box, the cockpit voice recorder and flight data recorder? Crucial evidence.
The source notes the initial difficulty in conflicting reports about finding them, and questions linger about whether the complete, undamaged recorders were ever truly recovered and analyzed transparently. Their contents are key to understanding what happened.
Yeah, those things are designed to be tough, to survive crashes. Any ambiguity around them just adds to the suspicion that maybe the official story isn't the whole story.
So all these inconsistencies, the passport, the Pentagon damage, Building 7, Flight 93, they build up this picture, presented in the source, that the official narrative of 9/11 might be flawed, perhaps intentionally.
Which leads directly into the justification for the War on Terror itself. The source makes a pretty bold claim here.
Yes, it posits that the entire 9/11 event might have been essentially a fabrication or manipulation used as a pretext, a reason to justify invading other countries.
Calling the U.S. a terrorist state using false flags for military and political gain? That's strong stuff.
It is. And Iraq is presented as the prime example. The justification used publicly was Saddam Hussein having weapons of mass destruction, WMDs.
Right, the infamous WMDs, Colin Powell's presentation at the UN, I remember that, showing satellite photos, talking about mobile bioweapons labs, holding up a vial meant to represent anthrax.
A very dramatic presentation, aiming to convince the world of the imminent threat. But as the source points out, no WMDs were ever found after the invasion. None.
Which made the whole justification collapse. And the source mentions George Bush later joking about it.
Yeah, apparently making light of the fact they couldn't find the WMDs at a press dinner, which, to critics cited in the source, seemed incredibly callous and suggested the WMD claim was never genuine.
So if it wasn't WMDs, what were the alleged ulterior motives, according to the source?
Well, for Iraq, the source suggests it was primarily about controlling oil, securing those vast reserves.
Okay, and for Afghanistan. That invasion happened even earlier, right after 9/11.
Yes, ostensibly to go after al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden, sheltered by the Taliban. But the source brings up another angle. Opium.
Opium. How does that fit in?
The source claims that the Taliban had actually been quite effective in eradicating opium poppy cultivation before the U.S. invasion.
Really? I didn't know that.
But after the invasion and the fall of the Taliban regime, poppy production apparently surged massively. Afghanistan became once again the world's largest producer of opium.
And the source connects this to
the subsequent opioid epidemic in the United States. It suggests, quite controversially, that the U.S. presence somehow facilitated this boom in opium production, even alleging that U.S. military forces were sometimes seen guarding poppy fields.
Wow. So the implication is that the war on terror, at least in Afghanistan, might have inadvertently or perhaps even intentionally fueled the drug trade that then devastated parts of America.
Yeah, it's the critical perspective presented in the source material, yes. A very stark contrast to the stated goal of fighting terrorism.
Speaking of fighting terrorism, How effective was the war on terror in actually catching terrorists? Does the source give any numbers?
It does mention a number, which is quite startling if accurate. It claims that the total number of actual terrorists caught during the entire war on terror effort was 9.
9. Just 9. After trillions spent, years of war, countless lives lost, only 9 terrorists captured.
That's the figure provided in the source. And if true, it certainly casts doubt on whether counterterrorism was the primary objective or perhaps suggests the strategy was incredibly ineffective if it's the main goal.
It really makes you wonder what the real objectives might have been. Okay, let's talk about Osama bin Laden himself. The official story is the Navy SEAL raid in Abbottabad, Pakistan in 2011.
Yes, Operation Neptune Spear. But the source introduces an alternative theory,
Which is?
that Osama bin Laden may have actually died much earlier, possibly as far back as 2002, from kidney failure or other health problems he was known to have, and that the 2011 raid was essentially staged.
Staged? Why would they do that? And what's the basis for this skepticism?
Well, the source points to the lack of definitive proof presented to the public. No body, no photos released, just the government's word. The swift burial at sea also raised eyebrows, preventing any independent verification.
Right. The burial at sea was unusual. They said it was according to Islamic custom, but many disputed that interpretation.
Plus, reports about his deteriorating health had circulated for years before 2011, so the idea he was still actively leading al-Qaeda from that compound seemed questionable to some.
And the source mentions something about the SEAL team involved.
Yes, it brings up the helicopter crash in Afghanistan shortly after the raid in August 2011, which killed many members of SEAL Team 6, the unit credited with the bin Laden raid.
And the source implies this wasn't an accident.
It suggests a motive, perhaps silencing those involved to prevent them from ever revealing that the person killed wasn't actually bin Laden, or exposing other details about the operation. It's a very dark theory.
And there was also the timing, wasn't there? The source connects the raid to domestic politics.
Yeah. It suggests the raid happened around the peak of the birther controversy surrounding President Obama's birth certificate. The idea being that the successful bin Laden raid provided a major political boost and effectively shut down that line of criticism. A timely distraction, perhaps.
So all these threads, the inconsistencies on the day, the justifications for war, the effectiveness, the bin Laden raid, they all seem to point towards a larger theme the source is highlighting.
Absolutely. The overarching idea presented is that these apparent lies, manipulations, and inconsistencies serve a larger government agenda focused on control and maintaining power.
And the media plays a role in this, according to the source.
Yes, it accuses the mainstream media of largely acting as a propaganda arm, pushing the government's narrative, often using the exact same talking points across different networks.
Like an echo chamber. We see that sometimes, don't we? The same phrases, the same framing, repeated everywhere.
And the source argues this has led to a significant decline in public trust in traditional media outlets. People are realizing they might not be getting the full story, or an unbiased one.
Which in turn has led to the rise of independent media, right? People seeking alternative sources online.
Exactly. A direct consequence of the perceived dishonesty or unreliability of the mainstream press, as the source sees it.
But the source doesn't stop there. It suggests there's a pushback against this, a new form of control being developed.
Yes, it talks about the push toward developing an AI surveillance grid. The idea being that as faith in media propaganda wanes, technology can step in.
How would that work? AI censorship.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
Using artificial intelligence to monitor online conversations, identify dissenting voices or narratives that challenge the official line, and then automatically censor or suppress them.
So targeting independent journalists, alternative viewpoints, anyone questioning the status quo and trying to steer people back towards the mainstream approved information channels.
That's the concern raised in the source. Using technology to automate censorship and maintain narrative control when traditional methods are failing.
That's a pretty dystopian outlook. The idea of AI actively managing what information people are allowed to see and discuss.
It's a chilling thought, certainly.
So these are, as we said, just some of the really unsettling questions and inconsistencies that our source material explored around 9/11 and the war on terror.
Yeah, from the passport that survived the inferno to the way Building 7 came down, the justifications for wars based on WMDs that didn't exist, the low number of terrorists caught, the questions around bin Laden's death.
It paints a picture that, at least according to this analysis, diverges pretty sharply from the official story we've all been told.
And it prompts that question.
Yeah.
What does it really mean if the narrative is about events that shaped the last 2 decades, events that led to wars and massive societal changes?
Hmm.
What if those narratives aren't entirely true? What are the implications?
Definitely something to think about. Thanks for tuning into the Despicable Maine Deep Dive podcast. Living in the despicable United States is quickly becoming theft of your life. Now that it is hijacked, it is only a matter of time.
Woke up to fire on the screen, twin towers falling like a fever dream. Suits on the tube said freedom's gone, but I smelled a lie before the smoke was gone. They said it was justice, but I saw a game set up, dressed in ashes and flame. Where's the wings, where's the wreck, where's the black box tape? Truth went missing in that Pentagon shade. Smoke and steel covering the deal. They're selling war and calling it real. Magic passports, a silent scream. We're just pawns in a global scheme. But I won't bow and I won't kneel. I see through the smoke and the steel. And the steel. Building 7 straight to the ground. Never touched, but it still came down. News called it early before it dropped. Who's riding the script, man? When will it stop? Cameras blind, but I see the plan. Opium fields in a foreign land. Freedom ain't free when the truth's in chains, and they censor your voice with digital reins. Smoke and steel covering the deal. They're selling war and calling it real. Magic passports, a silent scream. We're just pawns in a global scheme. But I won't bow and I won't kneel. I see through the smoke and the steel.